Okay. Shall I introduce the panelist, Graham Williamson? Yeah. Gama Aviation. Simon Doyley, currently commercial director for DC Aviation, Al-Futtaim, a company I happen to know quite well. Darren, Broderick, ACAM, active in Singapore and setting up business here and lots of other parts of the world. And Christopher, we haven't met yet, BBJ, marketing director. Right. First of all, a few words. As Alistair said, I've had the, thanks for the invite to moderate, by the way. I've had the pleasure to see not only corporate jet investor, but also the business aviation scene in Dubai grow. I think we were at the very first CJI, must have been about 10 years ago, and it was considerably smaller than this. So it's grown a lot. I think there's a lot more potential to grow, not only in the UAE, but the wider region as well. So I think we all have to make that happen. It's just a few words on my background. So as Alistair said, I worked for a couple of companies and had the joy to both deal in sales and aircraft management for airliners, for Airbus Corporate Jet. Also worked for TAG Aviation, ExecuJet, and DC Aviation. So I've seen both sides of the aircraft scheme, basically, and the pros and cons, or the relative advantages. So perhaps we'll first go, well, let me finish one more thing. As Alistair said, I was what? A traitor. I went to the airline business. It is a special airline, though. It's called Beond. We fly scheduled services with A320 family aircraft registered in the Maldives in what we call a luxury or premium leisure configuration. So it's holiday makers mostly. And we fly them from the Maldives or from destinations in Europe, Munich, Zurich, Milan, Middle East, Riyadh, and of course Dubai to the Maldives. And there's a lot more destinations to come. So we do some charter as well when we have the time, and the charter brokers here will be quite aware of that. When we have this schedule, the low season for us, which is actually the summer season, and we do some charter flights as well. Now, to all the panelists, perhaps each one of you, and I just go the line, can introduce himself a little bit and the activities, main activities of the company, and what kind of aircraft you fly. Simon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Simon Doyley. I'm the commercial director at DC Aviation. I actually started, way back in 2002 with Private Air in Geneva. And at that stage, we were operating 3 BBJs and a 757. And in that time, in terms of VVIP airliners, I've transitioned over to Royal Jets, to NASNet Jets. I've been operating Airbus corporate jets with Constellation for 4 years, and I'm currently now the commercial director at DC Aviation. We have 3 Airbus corporate jets operating in Europe. In the Middle East, we have a BBJ under management at the moment. And hopefully some Airbus joining the fleet later this year. So it's great to be here talking to you about the VV airliner market versus ultra-long-range aircraft. I'll pass over to Darren.
All right, Darren.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Darren Broderick. I'm the CEO of the ACAM Group. The head office is out of Singapore, but we have offices and operations in Melbourne, Sydney, Gold Coast in Australia, Jakarta, Indonesia, here in Dubai. We're in Braunschweig in Germany and most recently into London. We operate a fleet of 37 aircraft. The aircraft range from hawkers right through to the airliners. We've always been very heavy with the BBJs. We've had quite a few BBJs operating in Southeast Asia. And recently, well, the last 2 years, we've got into the ACJs. We've got 2 in service now, and we have a 3rd one coming.
Christopher?
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to sit here. I'm the only OEM on the panel. So my name is Christopher Shindle. I'm the Director of Global Marketing for Boeing Business Jets. We make everything from 737 MAX to 787 Dreamliner to 777X in BBJ format. Not being an operator, I'm here to just share the OEM's perspective.
Of course.
Thanks, Paul. We've known each other for a long time. I'm the opposite to Paul. I started in the airline business and finished up in business aviation. I used to live here. I was at Emirates when we had 3 aircraft, including a 727. I'm very old. So I now work with Marwan Kalak at Gama Aviation. We have multiple aircraft types from King Airs. We have 19 helicopters we operate in special missions, which includes various air ambulance operations, and I think was mentioned earlier, some military elements as well. We have an amazing FBO business in the UK with Paul, who's here at Paul Kinch, who's here at the moment, and we're building footprints here in the Middle East with our dedicated FBO in Sharjah. So my job is to fill that hangar and to manage aircraft, and the range is from King Airs to BBJs and ACJs. So we have a lot of experience of multiple types.
Excellent. So we can compare well. Now, before we go to the main subject, which is basically comparing the VVIP airliner types, so BBJ, ACJ, Embraer lineage, if you want, compared to the big Globals, Gulfstreams, and Falcons. Some of us were a bit confused, including myself, and we thought, like, do we also have to consider actually airlines itself, airline travel, notably business and first, compare that with business aviation? I think Graham had particular thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, 2 things. One is I have had many clients over the years who choose to do ultra-long range in an Emirates, an Etihad, or a Qatar Airways first-class cabin. I think that's evolving. I think that the facilities on the ultra-long-range jets, both the traditional airliners and also Gulfstream, Dassault, Bombardier, etc., have now moved into a new category. But back in the day, I had clients who owned aircraft who chose to fly Emirates when they weren't doing short haul.
For certain distances, yes.
But the point, and we both made the same mistake, we were thinking about the airline aspect, and we were looking at the saving. And the aircraft is a very, not a small part, but it's only a part of the journey. And actually, we win or lose on the ground. Certainly what Paul's doing at Beond is really not about just the aviation product in the air, but it's the FBO experience, it's not going through the terminal with the passengers, etc. So I think it's important for us to differentiate together, and then our next job is to make sure the clients get the right aircraft for what they need.
Yeah, I think, of course, we all know the advantages of a business jet or private jet, as people want to call it, in terms of not wasting time, increased privacy, not wasting time at airports, etc. But you're totally right. A big differentiator is not the air part, is the ground part. And a little bit of insight from what we are doing. As I said, I work for an airline, but 90% is scheduled. For the scheduled flights, we have to use the normal terminals, which means we lose time. Once we do a charter, we can use actually the FBOs, and it goes a lot quicker. What helps as well is the factor of the size of the aircraft. I can guarantee you that our whole boarding and deplaning process for 44 or 68 passengers, like we have in our aircraft, is a lot faster than doing that for 450 people in a 380. And that's really big business. But the ground part, yes, is part of it. So now we go to, I would say, comparing the qualities of BBJs, ACJs with Globals, Gulfstreams, Falcons, etc. First of all, I would say we can look at this point, I would say, from 3 different angles. We can look at it from the angle of the buyer or owner of the aircraft. We can look at it from the charter customer, prospective charter customer's angle. And again, lots of you in the room will be very familiar with that. And of course, we can look at it from the operator point of view. And part of us here all work for an operator. So we know the main choice characteristics if we first look at buying an aircraft like that. It's budget, size, number of seats, and range capabilities. But let's say, Darren, if somebody comes with a sizable budget in the 80 millions, I suppose. He comes to you and is open-minded what he wants to buy. How would you guide him in a particular aircraft type?
You know, look, it basically comes down to what they want to do, what they want to achieve with the aircraft. If they're into speed and they only fly with 2 or 3 people, then, and they've got a budget like that, then clearly something like a ultra long range airplane, a G650, G700, Global 7500 are probably the right choice, particularly if time matters to them. We all know the ultra high net worth, 15 minutes of their time is worth a lot of money, and these guys like to get where they're going. On the other hand, if he's not that guy that's in a hurry, and he's going to use the aeroplane not just with 2 or 3 people, and perhaps he's going to use a percentage of it for family use, then the BBJ or the ACJ, you can't go past the cabin. It's so comfortable. And if they don't care that it's going to take them 15 more minutes to fly from Dubai to London or to Singapore, then it's the perfect choice. It's got the comfort, it has the staterooms, it has the showers, and it's the ideal aircraft for family use and also a larger party of corporate use where they've got plenty of room to sit, have their meetings in comfort.
Right, and it's obviously not only the number of people, but also the bags, right?
Right.
Especially in this region. Simon, anything you want to add to that as choice criteria?
Yeah, for me, I mean, when you look at these VIP airliners, most of them really are like a flying apartment. You've got your sitting area, you've got potentially a conference area, an eating area, a bedroom, an ensuite bathroom. And that's really the main difference that I see with these VIP airliners as opposed to business jets. The business jets are much more sort of practical tools for business, whereas the VIP airliners are highly customizable and more representative of an owner's living space. I remember when I was at Private Air, we started off with we had a 16-seat BBJ, we had a 28-seat BBJ, and a 48-seat BBJ. More recently with Constellation, we had a 19-seat Airbus, and they're very different aircraft for a different purpose. Much like you at Beond, you're using these single-class VVIP airliners, or you could have I remember some of the aircraft we've seen recently belonging to some of our Russian friends, where they're basically a flying apartment. You'd have sort of 10 seats, and it's like a representative of their flat. So I think the main difference really is the customization you get in these BBJs. But the business jets tend to be a lot more typical. They're much more similar layouts. There's plug-and-play solutions within that, but the BBJs, ACJs are more customized.
Yes, correct. Now, obviously, from an OEM point of view, Christopher, so how would you convince the prospective buyer that the BBJ is the right thing to do?
Well, I won't get on my marketing.
A little bit is okay.
That, but I definitely share the same sentiments as Darren and Simon do. It really comes down to use case, right? It's kind of what you both were saying. And there are places where Boeing and Airbus where we win because we have the big bizliners when it comes down to cabin experience and things like that. Can we win in speed? Probably not, unless you have maybe a 787 where you can push 0.9 Mach, and really pick up the pace. But a 37 is not going to fly that fast. So we give up some of that advantage in speed, but we make up for it in cabin experience. And going back to something that Darren said, it's really about, that family. Can I have my family on this airplane? We see a lot of that kind of trend going in configurations, still very fully bespoke, like what you were saying, Simon. But do I have the space for my family, for the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the kids? We see a lot of our VIP customers going in that direction because they want to fly with their families. Yet, they still want the space to put them in another room when they're being too loud, and then they can have productivity maybe in another area. So that's kind of where we see it. And so we'll win in certain areas where they need the space, but we won't win in areas where maybe speed or even ramp presence is a concern.
We'll get on that later, yes.
Exactly.
And of course, in terms of multiple compartments, size of the delegation, the Middle East is a prime example for where that is important. Graham, anything you want to add?
Yeah, a couple of things. The first one is, and I always, whenever I'm speaking at a conference and preaching to the choir almost, but we need to engage the owner earlier in the process. They come to the operator when they bought the bloody aeroplane. It's too late to change, and it's the wrong one half the time. The problem is, my first ever experience in this industry was with Rob Wells in Poland, meeting with a client who'd bought an aircraft. And his first trip was to go from Warsaw to Cape down to the Caribbean. And he was going to have to stop in Cape Verde, and no one told him. And he said, oh my God, I bought the wrong aircraft. And that's so, really, it is exactly as everybody said, there are 160 different types of business jet. And one of them is right for you, but you need to do your research. And that research shouldn't really, with the greatest respect, come from a salesman. It should come from someone who has the depth of knowledge of an operator or a pilot or someone who can act for them independently. Because there's always a right choice. Whether it's, I've had one experience with 7 passengers and 262 bags. That's an Airbus or a Boeing. Other people want to go scuba diving when they land. That's a Gulfstream or a Global. You know, it's the cabin pressure, it's noise. There are so many factors. It's such a complex decision, and yet people often buy aircraft impulsively when it is something you have to live with for a long time.
Yeah, don't only buy it from the internet, talk to, not only to obviously the OEM or the broker, but to an operator as well. And if it's done well, that's a teamwork effort, basically. So yeah. By the way, how many aircraft types? 160, you said?
I believe so. I remember talking to one of the brokers who remain nameless. He's got a shop in London, and I think it starts with 160 aircraft types. And eventually you answer questions and it narrows down to the right one.
But that is also out of production aircraft, I suppose, right?
It is a very broad range of aircraft.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Let's switch a bit further, as we touched upon that, on the operator side of things. In terms of operating costs, Darren, you operate all kinds of aircraft, and if you look at the operating cost and taking really everything into account, so that means also the training, it's an important factor of the pilots, and things like spare parts cost. How do the different aircraft categories stack up? Are they similar, or what is your view?
No, they're totally different. Being based on an airliner, the ACJs and the BBJs, and the lineage for that matter, parts are available everywhere. And they're cheaper. You're not stuck with the direct from the major OEMs of normal conventional business jets who hold the monopoly on those parts. The parts are cheaper. Most importantly, they're available. You can get parts for either of a BBJ or an ACJ anywhere at any time. And it's a very important aspect. And this is how we do sell these aircraft to our clients. Because there's a misconception that being such a big aeroplane that, oh my God, it must cost a fortune to operate this thing. Well, actually, no, it doesn't. It's
right.
a lot cheaper. We, on our airliner fleet, we average, and I'm talking Asia Pacific and Middle East operating economics, you're talking around about an $8,000 an hour aeroplane.
But on the other hand, I mean, there's the bigger aircraft, there's more fuel burn, more landing fees,
Sure.
parking fees, size.
Absolutely.
Right.
But the
so
cost,
that compensates, you're saying?
Exactly, but it comes down to the balance of the costs of the parts, the availability of MROs for airliner type jets. Yeah, you don't go to a conventional airline MRO if you're doing an interior inspection. You want to go to a specialized facility that works on these VIP airliners. But for everything else, routine checks, routine maintenance, so simple, put it in anywhere, any airline that's got the approvals, done. And you know, again, we're not being extorted by these massive OEM type man-hour rates that we're all facing nowadays. The economics absolutely work. Yes, we burn more fuel. Yes, it costs us more to land, it costs us more to park. But when you weigh it all up over an aeroplane that's doing 300 to 400 hours a year, it comes out way ahead. Okay,
so you say in the end, the total picture is very comparable between a BBJ and a Gulfstream?
I would put, if I was operating let's say 650 ER or a Global 6000, I put them side by side, same amount of hours per year, 20% lower for the airliner.
Wow, okay.
And as you said, training, again, something that is available everywhere and is extremely reasonably priced compared to our other conventional corporate jets. You know, 650s, 700s, 7500s. I mean, the initial costs, okay, if the guy bought it brand new, he's getting his training slots as part of the deal. But if he's a pre-owned aircraft and he's got to train a crew, these guys are just about to have a heart attack when you tell them the money. When you tell an airliner owner, hey, it's only costing $12,000 for an initial in the United States on one of these types.
Yeah.
They go, what?
Yeah.
But you were charging me $25,000 for a Hawker that I owned before. You know, it's all in all, we estimate around 20% over a year's budget on an airliner versus one of the others.
And you mentioned, of course, indeed, there's more choice available of training centers. I mean, airlines can act as a training supplier. And in terms of maintenance, but just with a bit of side note, then from an operator, obviously, it depends on the registration you fly. You know, if it's a very common one, it's easier. If you find a less common one, like we do from the Maldives, sometimes it's a bit of a search. They have to be qualified first by the local authorities. So, Christopher, this must be music to your ears. Anything else you want to add to this?
No, it's honestly, I came from engineering before I moved over into marketing, so
Nobody's
it is
perfect.
music to my ears.
Same for me.
Because when we think about how we design and build these airplanes, you know, we're really thinking about the commercial customer in mind, to be fair. And I came from the commercial side first. But you're designing them for availability, you're designing them for maintainability and durability. And that's the benefit of being built on a commercial platform. And it is music to my ears to hear that, because when we do the math inside of Boeing, you know, we're seeing that, yes, we're gonna burn 10, 12% more in fuel. These are bigger airplanes, right? That's just the laws of physics that play with that. But then when you get into the maintenance, you see these longer intervals, right? So the airplane's not down as much. So we're seeing 50-some% in cost savings on the maintenance side, which more than overcomes the fuel loss or even the landing and nav fees that you hit because you're a bigger airframe, your MTOW is higher, this type of stuff. So it is music to my ears. But it is very true that when you think about a 737 or an A320, you think about the pilot pool that's around the world. You think about the mechanics that are around the world. You think about the parts that are around the world. And you have economies of scale. And that goes back to prove Darren's point. So it is, again, I say music to my ears, so that is very funny to say. But that is the commercial background coming out, and it benefits.
Yeah. And of course, there's the aspect that the airliners or the airliner-derived VVIP aircraft, they're made for running high hours, 4,000 hours a year, which is what we do, by the way. And if you look at a business jet, well, you know, whenever we look at it, it's, you know, 800, 1,000 hours a year is a lot. So, yeah. Graham, any notes?
I hear the numbers are probably correct, and I'm not arguing with that, but the capital cost is so much higher. For a traditional BBJ and ACJ, we're north of 100 million. Now, the 220 is different, and I accept the 220 has really lowered the bar, not lowered the bar is the wrong way to put it, but the 220 is a bit of a game changer. It is a traditional airline platform that is in the Gulfstream Bombardier price level. But outside of that, you know, you're talking maybe at 20, 30, 40 million differential.
Yeah.
And that's an awful lot of fuel and maintenance. Yeah. So I don't think if you're buying a jet because you want to look at the numbers, you probably shouldn't buy a jet. You should buy something that's a privilege, a benefit, a tool, and that fits your own profile and needs. And I totally agree. You know, family, bags, curb appeal, whatever it may be that you want, or if it is that you just want speed and efficiency, they're all different products. But I would also say that you've got to think about what happens on the ground. And there are a lot more airfields you can go to in a small, nimble, high-performance business jet than in a BBJ or an ACJ. You know, in terms of just parking, taxiways, runway performance, etc.
Right.
So it opens up far more airports.
That's true. That's a whole other aspect from the operations side. Let's switch to another point of view. As I said in the beginning, you can look at it from a buyer's point of view, owner's point of view, or obviously a charter customer point of view. Simon have a lot of experience on both, you know, the management and the charter side. Are the only criteria, apart from the price, of course, the hourly price you sell the charter for, but is the things like the number of seats and cabin space, is that the only thing, or do the charter customers appreciate the arguments of the high speed, the high altitude, the low cabin altitude, the extreme long range, you know, you want to go 17 hours or so non-stop. Is that important for the charter customer?
I think it depends a lot where you're based. I mean, from our perspective here in Dubai, the range dynamics of these VIP airliners is perfect for Europe. And to be honest, most of the customers in Europe in the Middle East tend to want to go to Europe, and then maybe they'll go to the States, but they'll almost always have a stop first in Europe. So the additional range requirements they see in terms of going direct to the US, it's quite rare for us to see those sorts of missions that are required.
Right.
Typically, we'll see most of our customers will go to Europe, spend 2 or 3 weeks in Europe, then maybe fly from Europe into the US. So for those types of passengers, the VIP airliners are perfect. I mean, to add to some of the points made earlier, I think the delta in the cost equation is enormous when you look at type ratings. Like the initial type rating for these aircraft, the new generation business jets, is astronomical. I'm pretty sure when you get these aircraft brand new off the shelf, they come with those type ratings. When you're buying a pre-owned aircraft as a new owner, you suddenly get a 3-figure training bill. It's a staggering difference.
Yeah, it can be a hurdle. Yeah.
Obviously, from the charter perspective, when you're actually chartering these aircraft out, the VIP airliners tend to command a much higher price in the market, and it's much more understandable for the passengers to understand because they can see the greater cabin benefits. So for me, especially in the UAE, the VIP airliners have got kind of a sweet spot in terms of range. I think
it is a sweet spot, but it might be different, obviously, for Darren if you want to fly from Singapore non-stop deep into the US. I suppose that you have to go with, you know, the G700 or the Global 75,500, those kind of planes, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Bizliner has its limitations, of course. Again, depending on how many tanks you put in. Which are, of course, the option. Most of the stuff in Asia Pacific is tanked right up. There is no baggage space. Or if there is, there's only the forward hold, and that's it. So it all comes down to you know, where people are going. But as Simon said, you know, if you look at the market here in the Middle East, the aircraft of choice for most families here is the airliner.
Right.
They love the BBJ and the ACJ cabin. And we have a client in Asia even. He's had just about every type of aircraft there's ever been. But he had a 650ER, and his children are now having grandchildren for him. And he said, I've got to get a BBJ or an ACJ again. He said, I can't stand it because he's got all the kids crammed into a 650. He said, I want to go down the back and close that bedroom. He said, I don't care how much longer it takes me to get there. It's not a concern as long as I've got peace.
That's something for the families. But yeah, obviously also, I suppose, Christopher, that one of the selling arguments towards corporation to see it as a corporate tool is that you can have the space for a conference room, and a separate meeting room and a bedroom, etc. So even if those people are charter client, or it might be, what I've seen quite often myself, the company has one particular aircraft themselves, which is, you know, when they fly 5 passengers, but if there's a bigger group, they might switch to chartering in a BBJ, right?
For sure. Just one point on what Graham mentioned too before. Yeah, the acquisition cost of a new airliner is clearly higher with a completion. You know, you're talking 30, 40 million more generally. However, what we find is that those clients that own the airliners, they retain that asset for a lot longer because it is a customized interior, because it is an extension of their apartment. You know, and they just love it. And so they keep it for probably an average of 15 years versus anyone that's in a conventional long-range business jet generally get out of warranty, so the 5-year, 6-year mark, and they're flipping again.
On the other hand, yeah.
So all in all, at the end of the day, the guy with a Bizliner is probably spending less money over the same term because he's not losing on every flip, and he's not got the depreciation at the same rate. And this is one of the issues with the bizjet liners is that, you know, 10 years ago, it was very hard to actually sell bizjet aeroplanes. People didn't want them. They sort of lost it for a while, but they've made a resurgence. Now we can't find airframes.
Yeah, at the
People
moment it's...
hang on
yeah,
to them.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, otherwise you're finding the 2000 to 2005 models out there, but people that want something that's 10 or 15 years, they're just not on the market.
But there's a flip side of that coin as well, of course. If you keep the aircraft, especially the VVIP airliner, for a long time, yes, the value retention is good. On the other hand, you buy a 10-year-old aircraft and chances, most likely, you don't like the colors or the layout of the interior. Once you start changing things on the interior on an airliner type, again, we do that as an airline ourselves, it takes time, a lot of cost, engineering work, STCs, etc. So obviously, the more canvas you have to change things, people do customize. So it's a double-sided coin, I think. Yeah. Another perspective, something perhaps keep on going with the Asian perspective there first. In terms of ramp presence, wanting to be seen, or rather the opposite, going incognito, not wanting to be seen. Is that an issue for people? I suppose it's very different between different parts of the world. It's a cultural thing, probably. How does Asia, Middle East, Europe combine? Who wants to jump in first?
Yeah, look, I think in Asia it doesn't really matter. The bigger the better there. You know, the noisier, they don't care. They love it. So getting off an ACJ or BBJ, it does command a great presence as well. Sure, the beautiful 7500 or G700 on the ramp is magnificent as well, but it doesn't have the same impact because it's not that size, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think people certainly don't worry about the perception of them owning a large aircraft. Of course, in that part of the world, we don't have the environmental pressures that you do perhaps in Europe or in the US or you know, even Australia. But in Southeast Asia, no one cares that that's a gas guzzler. And
yeah, and that's probably the same in the Middle East as well. As
right.
I would say, bigger is not an issue. And of course, you can always paint the aircraft, the ACJ or the BBJ white, and you think it's an airliner, right? So that can help. But I suppose in Europe it's different, isn't it, Graham?
I think it is to a certain extent. I think there's too much lip service paid to... At the end of the day, a business jet is a tool, and most people will justify that tool for the benefits that it provides to them. But I also think that the curb appeal, for me, I don't really see that. I don't really think that my jet's bigger than your jet is really relevant to the people that we serve. Going back to the charter piece, by the way, I may have sounded slightly down, but I'll take all the BBJs you've got, because the margin, the bigger the aircraft, the better the margin. Simple as that. You know, you can just charge more. And for big tours, for music tours, for the big, you know, there's, again, even in the charter market, the aircraft type will dictate the customer's requirement. You know, when whoever's going to do Oasis tour, they need a very big aircraft to keep Liam and Noel apart. So you have one at the back and one at the front. So you need to have that choice. And again, it's important for operators, if we're privileged enough to have multiple types, to have a range of aircraft, from a small cabin to super sizes and airliners.
Yeah.
But curb appeal, you know, I don't think it's that relevant. Okay. Although in Europe there is a much more reluctance to celebrate being successful.
Yes, yeah, we see that the last couple of years. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Then another aspect, and I'm pretty sure you have specialized sessions on that, but high-speed Wi-Fi internet on board. How important is that, and can it compensate for other things missing in an aircraft, let's say the shower or not a fully up-to-date interior? Simon?
Yeah, I mean, for me, high-speed Wi-Fi is a must. You can't be flying on these high ultra-spec VIP airliners and not have a high-speed internet connection. It's absolute must these days. Obviously, Starlink's getting increasingly popular and has a much more lower cost of entry. The shower argument, I think, is one you could take it or leave it. Sometimes we used to get a lot of requests for showers. I think probably most flights, they weren't used, actually. So I don't really buy that argument as much. But yeah, high-speed Wi-Fi for sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I was an operator also, we charged for it separately if you exceed a certain number of, gigabytes, etc. So it can be a differential line of income as well for the operator. So I'm sure you do the same. You mentioned the shower. We see a little bit of a trend of that coming available as an option as well. I think on the last Globals, Gulfstreams, I'm not sure, perhaps they are. Is that going to be a trend, or what do we see? What do we think? Darren? No?
No, not. I mean, we of all the new aircraft we've delivered, not one of them has taken the shower option in a 650 or a Global. Absolutely not. For the size of these showers is tiny. A lot of our clients are not tiny. And therefore, they would very much struggle getting in and out of this thing anyway. And the amount of water we have to carry, the additional plumbing, the additional weight, it really just, you save it for the airliner type cabin. If you want an aeroplane with a shower, then buy a BBJ or an ACJ, I say.
Yeah, indeed, your range will be definitely impacted by the weight of carrying the water around. Okay. Any other points you want to make on that, perhaps, Christopher?
No.
Interior flexibility?
Sure.
No?
Many sentiments that my colleagues have shared here. Graham brought up a great comment that the acquisition cost of a BBJ or an ACJ is higher than your traditional ultra-long-range aircraft. But, I think that's where, we at Boeing are continuing to try and push that price point down. Or with something like BBJ Select, try and get it lower to get closer to narrow that gap. So that's an area for improvement at Boeing. The other thing, just want to make a comment on ramp presence, because I do think it varies from region to region. Our corporate customers in the US who are beholden to maybe some sustainability, and even in Europe it's the same way, some sustainability objectives of an organization, might be deterred by the ramp presence of a 737 or an A320. But again, it really depends, because when you get down to brass tacks, these airplanes aren't that much bigger than a traditional Global, right?
That's
You're about
true.
1.8.
Yeah, actually,
so it's pretty close.
the pure business jets have grown in size, especially wingspans, so we're almost the same, right? Unless anybody else wants to remark anything on the subjects, perhaps there's some questions on Slido from the room. How do I see this? Are there questions here? Oh, what's this? Right. Availability of parts, airliners versus business jets. Power by the hour schemes, part sharing club that single aircraft owners would never find reasonable. Yes. Who wants to, as an operator, comment on that first? Can you see the question, Graham?
No.
Basically, do you have to
power by the hour, yeah. I think programs...
competitor to do the parts?
I mean, one of the other things, is that the OEM programs are both a curse and a privilege and a benefit. You resent paying what can be significant amounts until you actually need to use it. So we would encourage owners, particularly with newer aircraft, to remain in or to take on full programs. I think with the airliner sector, it is slightly different, because you probably don't need to take, the risk is less because the availability is much higher. And I do completely agree, when it comes to training and maintenance, then a Boeing is going to be a much easier product to manage than maybe a more traditional business jet. But in saying that, it is always good to take insurance, and most of the engine manufacturers, particularly engines, it's probably essential to be on programs.
And it depends on so many things, like how old is the aircraft, obviously, how many cycles, notably not so much the hours. I mean, we see that as well. As the aircraft come out of a heavy check or so before you start operating it, it's a big change. And still, you will always find that just the part failing is the one which is not in stock. So experience with that.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that particular point. I think one of the problems I see with some of these VIP airliners is because they have highly customized interiors, you get a lot of obsolescence problems. There's a lot of completion centers where these airliners have been fitted out, and 5, 6, 7, 10 years later, they don't exist anymore. You've got to scrabble around trying to find who's got ownership of the STC. So that can become a much higher cost item in terms of parts and replacement.
No, that is a very good point. We've been through that recently. that certification is a critical part of the ownership of an aircraft, particularly one that has got a 30-year life, potentially. But if you decide to remarket it or sell it, it becomes a nightmare to change the reg.
All right. I see an interesting point here. Pilots generally choose airplanes because it's what they want to fly, not what the owner needs. Yes, I've seen that close up several times. And that's valid, by the way, for airliner types and business jets. Somebody who flies forever a Boeing says it's the best in the world. Same for somebody who's used to an Airbus. But hopefully the pilot is not the only voice in the room in talking to the owner. There's hopefully either the OEM or the sales broker, and do not forget to talk to an operator. Get their neutral point on this. You get the real story. So yeah, pilots, important, of course, but there should be more than one voice in the room. How much more reliable is a BizLiner versus other ultra-long-range business jets? Oh, oops, who wants to volunteer there?
I'll have a shot. Look, generally they're much more reliable. Much more reliable. It's designed as an airliner. It's designed to work. It's a very simplified systems in these aircraft. Some of these new modern jets that are coming out, we all know they're flying computers. Okay, an Airbus is as well, but it's proven technology now. It's been around for a long time. You look at the Boeing. I mean, we can get in one from the 1980s and jump into a MAX, and every switch is nearly exactly the same as it always has been. They're simple aircraft, and they're designed to fly, so the reliability is much higher. Even if you go back into a corporate jet, the Embraer Legacy, for example, that aircraft goes and goes and goes because it was designed originally as a regional jet. Mm-hmm. So very simple systems, very reliable systems. The newer stuff now, okay, it's lovely, it's fantastic technology, but particularly when a new model is released and it's taking time for number one crews to get used to the systems, and the engineering team who are new to the aircraft as well. So we find that they're not quite so reliable in terms of comparison with the airliner fleet.
But of course, always important, especially with a slightly older aircraft, and that's valid for liners, airliners, or business jets, is to go through a good inspection, a PPI, perhaps even a borescope, etc. Again, from an airline point of view, the most important part is the engine, basically, less than the airframe. You see people buying just complete aircraft just to have the engines and trade them out. But again, with the number of hours flown in the airlines versus the corporate jets, that's a different calculation. Yeah.
Well, I think it also goes back to the PBH question before.
H.
Every airliner that we have in our fleet is at least minimum on engine program.
Right.
I like to cover the APUs, and in certain cases we go tip to tail airframe as well. It all comes down to whether the owner wants a very, very defined fixed operating budget per year.
Although that's less common in the airlines, of course, the tip to tail or the engine programs. We basically just want to have the engines out of a full overhaul or a restoration, and there's lots of difference between the different engine types. But I think this might be a good point to make a sale for a BBJ. Christopher, I see the question. What's the cost of a BizLiner now? Perhaps we can sell one right now. And
acquisition
what is
cost?
BBJ Select? I'm not aware of that either. To fill us
without
in.
getting on, standing on a soapbox for sales and marketing. When we think about something specifically like BBJ Select, it's a pre-engineered airframe where you can simplify your acquisition cost because of the cabin configuration. There's 216 different options you can pick, from your forward to your mid to your aft to your suite in terms of those lounges and suites. They've all been pre-engineered, removing that non-recurring engineering. So it simplifies the cost equation that way, but it also simplifies the delivery function as well. So when it goes into a completion center, it's going to be completed faster. So it's a little bit of the price coming down to sub 100 million, but also being able to shrink that acquisition cost or that acquisition timeline below 2 years as well.
And we're talking here about the MAX 8,
That's
7?
Max 7.
7, okay. So how fast can you deliver?
How fast can I deliver it? Earliest availability right now would a completed Max 7, a completed Max 7 coming out the other door of a completion center would be in 2027.
Okay, that's not too bad compared to the airliner business, right? I think we're
We
there.
do prioritize our priority customers. Our VIP stuff has advantageous positions in our production skyline.
You have dedicated slots. Yes, I'm aware of that from my Airbus days. I think there's somebody of Airbus going to make the points, particularly on the ACJ later. So unless there are any other questions, thank you very much. Alistair?
Thanks, Paul.